They say a man's home is his castle, but no one ever mentions what happens when the castle becomes a prison. My name is Margaret Thornfield, and for 40 years I believed that opening my heart and my home to family would create a legacy of love and gratitude. I was devastatingly wrong. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The moment I realized my daughter-in-law Victoria saw me not as family, but as an obstacle to be removed, wasn't when she started rearranging my furniture without asking. It wasn't when she threw away my late husband's reading chair, claiming it was taking up valuable space. It wasn't even when she began referring to my own home as our future property in front of her friends. No, the moment of absolute clarity came on a freezing December night in Millbrook Falls, Connecticut, when Victoria looked me straight in the eye and said, "Margaret, we've decided you'll be more comfortable sleeping in the garage from now on. The guest room needs to be converted into a nursery, and frankly, you snore too loudly for upstairs anyway." The garage. My own garage. In the home my beloved Charles and I had built from the ground up 45 years ago. That was the night I decided that if I wasn't family enough to sleep under my own roof, then perhaps I wasn't obligated to leave that roof to anyone when I was gone. What happened next shocked my son Daniel, horrified Victoria, and changed the trajectory of 3 generations of my family forever. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 73-year-old widow went from beloved grandmother-to-be to unwanted houseguest in her own home, and how one terrible night in a cold garage became the catalyst for the most empowering decision of my entire life. I never expected my golden years to unfold this way. At 73, I had envisioned myself as the matriarch of a loving family, perhaps teaching my grandchildren to bake my famous apple turnovers in the same kitchen where I'd raised their father. Instead, I found myself tiptoeing through my own hallways, asking permission to use my own telephone, and eventually sleeping on a cot between paint cans and lawn equipment. My journey began in 1951 when Charles and I purchased 5 acres of rolling farmland just outside Millbrook Falls. Back then, the town was barely a dot on the map, surrounded by dairy farms and apple orchards. We were both teachers at the local elementary school, making modest salaries but rich in dreams. Charles taught 4th grade while I handled the kindergarteners, and together we saved every penny for 3 years to build our dream home. The house we constructed wasn't grand by today's standards, but it was ours. A charming colonial with 4 bedrooms, wraparound porches, and large windows that caught the morning light perfectly. Charles designed the layout himself, ensuring every room had a purpose, every corner held potential for family memories. The kitchen became my domain, with custom cabinets Charles built by hand and a breakfast nook, where we planned to share countless family meals. We filled those rooms with 35 years of marriage, laughter, holiday celebrations, and eventually our only child, Daniel. Born when I was 31 and Charles was 33, Daniel was our miracle baby after years of trying. We poured every ounce of love and attention into raising him in that house, creating traditions that we hoped would be passed down for generations. Charles passed away 8 years ago after a brief battle with cancer. The grief nearly broke me, but the house itself became my lifeline. Every creaky floorboard held memories of his footsteps. His workshop in the basement still smelled faintly of sawdust, and his cologne. The garden we'd tended together continued to bloom each spring, a testament to the life we'd built. Daniel had moved to Portland, Oregon after college, building a successful career in software development. For years, our relationship consisted of weekly phone calls, annual Christmas visits, and the occasional summer vacation when he'd bring friends or girlfriends to stay. I treasured those visits, cooking elaborate meals and showing off the photo albums that chronicled his childhood in every room of the house. Then, 3 years ago, Daniel called with news that initially filled me with joy. He was engaged to Victoria Hamilton, a marketing executive he'd met at a conference. They were planning to marry, and, even better, Daniel had received a job offer from a tech company based in Hartford, less than an hour from Millbrook Falls. "Mom," he said during that fateful phone call, his voice bright with excitement, "we were wondering if we could stay with you for a few months while we house hunt. Victoria's really excited to get to know you better, and it would give us time to find the perfect place in Connecticut." I was overjoyed. After 8 years of rattling around in a house that felt too big and too empty, the prospect of family, filling those rooms again, seemed like a gift from heaven. I immediately began preparing Daniel's old room and the guest suite, imagining cozy dinners and long conversations with my future daughter-in-law. Victoria was beautiful, poised, and initially charming when they arrived for the engagement visit last spring. She admired the house enthusiastically, asking thoughtful questions about the architecture and the history of each room. She seemed genuinely interested in family photos and listened attentively to stories about Daniel's childhood. "Margaret," she said during that first weekend, "this house is absolutely magical. Daniel is so lucky to have grown up somewhere with such character and warmth." I felt an immediate kinship with her, relieved that my son had chosen someone who appreciated not just him, but the family heritage I'd spent decades building. When they moved in 6 months ago, I was prepared for some adjustment period. After all, I'd been living alone for years, and suddenly sharing space with 2 energetic 30-somethings would naturally require compromise on everyone's part. I was willing to be flexible, to make accommodations, to welcome them, not just as guests but as family. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly temporary stay would transform into permanent takeover, or how the charming woman who had admired my home would begin to see me as an inconvenience standing between her and complete ownership of everything I held dear. The changes started subtly. Victoria would suggest improvements to the decor, always framed as helpful observations. She'd rearrange furniture while I was at my weekly volunteer shift at the library, claiming she was just trying things out. When I'd gently mention that I preferred the original arrangement, she'd smile apologetically and say she was just trying to make the space work better for everyone. But what happened next escalated far beyond simple interior decorating disagreements, transforming my sanctuary into a battlefield where the stakes were nothing less than my dignity, my independence, and ultimately, my own roof over my head. Little did I know that the worst was yet to come, and that cold December night in the garage would become the turning point that changed everything for all of us forever. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The transformation from subtle suggestions to outright disrespect didn't happen overnight, but when it came, it hit like a sledgehammer to everything I thought I knew about family loyalty. It was a Tuesday evening in early December when Victoria made the announcement that would shatter my world. I had spent the afternoon in my kitchen, preparing Daniel's favorite pot roast with roasted vegetables, the same recipe I'd been making for him since he was 10 years old. The aroma filled the house, mixing with the scent of the pine garland I'd hung along the banister in preparation for Christmas. Daniel was working late again, something that had become increasingly common since Victoria had started what she called optimizing our living situation. I had set the table for 3, using my good china and the cloth napkins Charles had given me for our 20th anniversary. Despite everything, I still held on to the hope that family dinners could bring us closer together. Victoria emerged from what used to be my sewing room, carrying a thick folder and wearing an expression I'd never seen before, cold, calculating, and utterly determined. She sat down across from me at my own dining room table, spreading papers across the surface like a general planning a military campaign. "Margaret," she began, her voice taking on the tone she typically reserved for business calls, Daniel and I have been doing some research, and we need to discuss the living arrangements in this house. I looked up from serving the pot roast, confused by her formal demeanor. Living arrangements? I thought things were working out well. Is there something I can adjust to make you both more comfortable? Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Actually, yes, there are several things that need to change immediately. She pulled out what appeared to be architectural drawings and floor plans. I've had a contractor assess the space, and we've identified some significant inefficiencies in how the rooms are currently being utilized. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the serving spoon. Contractor? When did a contractor come to my house? I looked up from serving the pot roast, confused by her formal demeanor. Living arrangements? I thought things were working out well. Is there something I can adjust to make you both more comfortable? Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. Actually, yes. There are several things that need to change immediately. She pulled out what appeared to be architectural drawings and floor plans. I've had a contractor assess the space, and we've identified some significant inefficiencies in how the rooms are currently being utilized. My hands trembled slightly as I set down the serving spoon. Contractor? When did a contractor come to my house? Last Thursday, while you were at your little library volunteer thing, Victoria said dismissively. Don't worry, I supervised everything. The point is, we've determined that the master bedroom should obviously go to Daniel and me, since we're the ones planning to start a family. The guest room needs to be converted into a nursery immediately, and your current bedroom would make an excellent home office for Daniel's consulting work. I felt the blood drain from my face. Victoria, this is my bedroom. The bedroom I shared with Charles for 35 years. Where am I supposed to sleep? Without missing a beat, Victoria flipped to another page in her folder. We've thought of that. The garage has excellent potential. It's spacious, it has electricity, and with a small space heater it could be quite cozy. Think of it as your own private apartment. The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually gasped, certain I had misheard her. The garage? You want me? To sleep in my own garage? It's the most practical solution, Victoria continued, her tone suggesting she was discussing something as mundane as changing light bulbs. Honestly, Margaret, at your age, you don't really need much space anyway. And let's be realistic. This house is going to be ours eventually. We're just accelerating the timeline to make it work better for everyone. Going to be theirs eventually. The casual entitlement in those words made my chest tighten with something between rage and disbelief. Victoria, I'm 73 years old, not dead. This is my home. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with the kind of patience one might show. A difficult child. Of course it's your home, Margaret. No one is saying otherwise. But you have to admit, it's inefficient for one elderly woman to occupy a 4-bedroom house when a young family could make much better use of the space. I'm not occupying it, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to remain calm. I live here. I built this house with my husband. Every room, every corner, every floorboard represents our life together. Victoria's expression grew colder. That's very sentimental, but sentimentality doesn't pay for heating bills or property taxes. Daniel and I have been covering most of the household expenses since we moved in, so I think we deserve some say in how the space is organized. This was news to me. While they had insisted on contributing to groceries and utilities, I had never asked them to pay for anything, and I certainly hadn't given them any authority over my home. I never asked you to pay for anything. This house is paid off, and I manage my own expenses just fine. Barely, Victoria scoffed. Margaret, you're living on a teacher's pension and Social Security. Without our contribution, you'd be struggling to keep this place heated in the winter. The least you could do is show some gratitude instead of being so resistant to reasonable accommodations. I stared at her across my own dining table, wearing my own china, in my own home, and realized I was looking at a stranger. Not just someone I didn't know, but someone who had systematically planned to displace me from my own life. "Where exactly in the garage do you envision me sleeping?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria brightened, apparently taking my question as acceptance of her plan. "I've already ordered a Murphy bed that can fold up against the wall during the day. There's space for a small dresser, and we can install a curtain for privacy. You'll have your own entrance through the side door, so you won't have to disturb us when you come and go." My own entrance. So I wouldn't disturb them, in my own house. "What about a bathroom?" I managed to ask. "There's a powder room off the mudroom that you can access without coming through the main house," Victoria replied, consulting her notes as if she were a hotel manager discussing amenities. "It's actually quite convenient." I sat there, looking at this woman who had systematically planned to exile me to my own garage, and felt something snap inside my chest. Not my heart breaking. That would imply surprise. This was more like the sound of a bridge being burned, deliberate and final. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. Victoria's mask of false pleasantness finally slipped completely. "Then you'll need to find somewhere else to live, won't you? Because Daniel and I aren't going anywhere. We have plans for this house, Margaret. Big plans. And those plans don't include an elderly woman taking up space we need for our future." The pot roast had grown cold on the table. The candles I'd lit flickered in the silence that followed her ultimatum. Outside, I could hear the wind picking up, rattling the windows Charles had installed with such care decades ago. "I see," I said finally. "And Daniel agrees with this arrangement?" "Daniel wants what's best for our marriage and our future family," Victoria replied smoothly. "He understands that sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for the greater good." That night, after Victoria had retreated upstairs to what she now considered her domain, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by 45 years of memories and faced with an impossible choice: submit to exile in my own garage, or fight back against a woman who clearly saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to her inheritance. I had raised Daniel to be kind, respectful, and grateful. I had opened my home to his wife without reservation. I had welcomed her as the daughter I'd never had, and in return, she wanted to banish me to sleep among paint cans and lawn equipment while she redecorated my bedroom and planned my funeral. I sat there in the growing darkness, one thought crystallized with absolute clarity. If Victoria wanted to treat me like a tenant in my own home, perhaps it was time she learned exactly who held the deed. What happened next would shock everyone. Who thought they knew Margaret Thornfield, the sweet elderly widow who always put family first? But they were about to discover that this sweet elderly widow had spent 73 years learning exactly how to protect what was hers. And what was mine was about to become very clear to everyone involved. The morning after Victoria's ultimatum, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. But before I could process the full magnitude of what she had proposed, I needed to understand exactly how deep this betrayal ran. I started in my own bedroom, the master bedroom Charles and I had shared for 35 years. Victoria had already begun making subtle changes that I'd tried to ignore. Charles's cologne bottle was gone from the dresser. The framed photo of our wedding day had been moved to a less prominent spot. His reading glasses, which I'd kept on. His nightstand as a small comfort had disappeared entirely. But it was when I opened what used to be my jewelry box that the full scope of Victoria's presumption became clear. My grandmother's pearl necklace, the one I'd planned to pass down to Daniel's future daughter, was missing. So was the sapphire ring Charles had given me for our 25th anniversary. My hands shook as I checked every drawer, every compartment. Gone. All of it. I found Victoria in the kitchen, calmly drinking coffee from my mother's china teacup while scrolling through her phone. She looked up with that practiced smile that no longer fooled me. "Good morning, Margaret. I hope you've had time to think about our conversation last night. I've already called the contractor to schedule the garage conversion. We could have you moved in by this weekend." "Where are my grandmother's pearls?" I asked, skipping any pretense of pleasantries. Victoria's smile never wavered. "Oh, those old things? I had them appraised yesterday. They're actually quite valuable. Nearly $8,000. I thought we should have them properly insured, so I put them in our safety deposit box for safekeeping." Our safety deposit box, not mine. Ours. "Victoria, those pearls belong to my grandmother, then my mother, then me. They're not community property to be appraised and stored wherever you see fit." "Of course not," Victoria said, her tone patronizing. "But at your age, is it really wise to keep valuable jewelry lying around? What if something happened to you? What if you forgot where you put them? This way they're safe for future generations." Future generations, meaning her children. Not even born yet, and already she was redistributing my family heirlooms. "I want them back," I said firmly. Victoria set down the teacup with deliberate care. "Margaret, I think we need to have a frank discussion about your situation. You're 73 years old, living alone in a house that's far too big for you, trying to manage finances and valuables that would be better handled by younger, more capable hands." The condescension in her voice made my blood pressure spike. "I've been managing my finances and my valuables perfectly well for 8 years since Charles died. Thank you very much." "Have you?" Victoria pulled out her phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be photographs. "Because I've been documenting some concerning things since we moved in. Like the time you left the stove on for 3 hours, or when you couldn't remember where you put your car keys for 2 days, or the expired medications I found in your bathroom cabinet." I stared at her, horrified. She had been documenting my daily life, looking for signs of incompetence, creating a case file against my own mental capacity. "Those were isolated incidents," I said, though even as I spoke, I could hear how defensive I sounded. "Everyone forgets things occasionally." "Of course they do," Victoria agreed with false sympathy. "But when you combine minor memory issues with the challenges of maintaining a property this size, plus the financial strain of property taxes and maintenance costs—" She let the implication hang in the air. "What financial strain?" I manage. "My expenses perfectly well." Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Margaret, do you have any idea what this house would sell for in today's market? The property taxes alone are eating up a huge portion of your fixed income. The heating bills last winter were astronomical. The roof needs work, the plumbing is original to the house, and don't get me started on the electrical system." She was right about some of these things, though I'd been managing them just fine. But hearing her catalog the house's needs like a real estate investor assessing a flip property made my stomach turn. "This house has been my home for 45 years, I said quietly. "It's not a financial burden. It's my life. And we're not asking you to give up your life," Victoria replied smoothly. "We're asking you to be practical about your circumstances. You could sell this place, move into a nice assisted living facility, and have enough money left over to live comfortably for the rest of your years." Assisted living. The words hit like a slap. 6 months ago, I had been an independent woman managing her own household. Now, according to Victoria, I was a confused elderly person who needed institutional care. "I'm not moving to assisted living," I said firmly. "Then you'll love the garage arrangement," Victoria responded without missing a beat. "It gives you independence while ensuring you have family nearby in case of emergencies." I realized then that this had all been planned from the beginning. The documentation of my supposed incompetence, the inventory of my valuables, the assessment of the house's value. Victoria hadn't moved in to get to know me better or to save money while house hunting. She had moved in to evaluate her future inheritance and remove any obstacles to claiming it. "Where's Daniel in all this?" I asked. "Does he know about your plans for me?" Victoria's expression grew colder. "Daniel loves you, Margaret, but he's also a practical man. He understands that families sometimes have to make difficult decisions. He's seen how overwhelmed you've become trying to maintain this place." "Overwhelmed?" I've never said I was overwhelmed. You didn't have to say it. It's obvious to anyone with eyes. The missed appointments, the unpaid bills I've had to help you sort through, the way you repeat yourself in conversations. Victoria ticked off each supposed failing on her fingers, like a prosecutor presenting evidence. I felt the ground shifting beneath my feet. Had I missed appointments? Were there unpaid bills? I thought I'd been managing everything adequately, but Victoria's certainty made me question my own perceptions. Even if any of that were true, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, it wouldn't give you the right to exile me to my own garage or steal my jewelry. I'm not stealing anything, Victoria snapped, her composed facade finally cracking. I'm protecting family assets from someone who's clearly losing the capacity to manage them responsibly. Do you think Daniel wants to watch his inheritance crumble? Because his mother is too proud to admit she needs help? His inheritance. There it was, laid bare. This wasn't about my well-being or Daniel's happiness. This was about money and property, and Victoria's determination to secure her future at my expense. This house isn't Daniel's inheritance, I said quietly. It's my home, and I'm very much alive. Victoria's smile returned, sharp and predatory. Of course you are. But inheritance planning is about being responsible for future generations. Surely you want what's best for Daniel and his children. Children that didn't exist yet were already taking precedence over the woman who had raised their father. I excused myself and walked upstairs to what Victoria now considered her future nursery, the guest room where I had lovingly prepared space for their visit. She had already begun measuring the walls and making notes about paint colors. A stack of baby furniture catalogs sat on the dresser next to fabric samples and nursery decor magazines. In the corner, I found a notebook that had fallen behind the dresser. When I picked it up, it fell open to pages of Victoria's handwriting. Timeline projections for room conversions, cost estimates for renovations, a detailed inventory of my possessions with estimated values. And on the last page I saw a note that made my blood run cold. Estate planning consultation scheduled for next month. Discuss power of attorney options and competency assessments. Victoria wasn't just planning to move me to the garage. She was planning to have me declared incompetent so she could take control of everything. Standing in that room, holding evidence of her systematic plan to steal my life, I felt something fundamental shift inside me. The sweet, accommodating Margaret, who had always put family first, was done being victimized. The woman who had survived the Great Depression, built a home from nothing, and raised a son while teaching other people's children, was about to remind everyone exactly who they were dealing with. I walked downstairs to find Victoria still in the kitchen, now on the phone with someone discussing timeline acceleration and removing obstacles to occupancy. She didn't even bother to lower her voice when she saw me. "Victoria," I said calmly, "I need to run some errands today. I'll be back this evening." She barely looked up from her call. "Whatever, Margaret. Try not to get lost." As I drove away from the house Charles and I had built with our own hands, I realized that Victoria had made one crucial miscalculation. She had assumed that because I was elderly, I was powerless. She had confused kindness with weakness and generosity with stupidity. She was about to learn the difference. My first stop was the Millbrook Falls Community Bank, where I had maintained accounts since Charles and I first moved to town. The building itself had been renovated twice since 1951, but Mrs. Eleanor Hartwick still worked behind the same mahogany desk where she'd helped us open our first joint savings account all those decades ago. "Margaret," Eleanor exclaimed as I approached her window. "How lovely to see you, dear. How are you adjusting to having Daniel and his wife staying with you?" The question stung more than I expected. Even Eleanor, who had known our family for 45 years, had heard about the living arrangement. I wondered what version of the story had reached her ears. "Actually, Eleanor, that's partly why I'm here. I need to review all of my accounts and safety deposit box access. I want to make sure everything is properly secured." Eleanor's expression grew more serious as she pulled up my records. Of course, dear. Let me get your file. She typed efficiently on her computer, then frowned slightly. Margaret, I see there was some activity on your safety deposit box just yesterday. Someone accessed it with your key. My heart began to race. That's impossible. I have my key right here. I fumbled in my purse and produced the small silver key I'd kept on my keychain for decades. Eleanor's frown deepened. That's odd. The signature on the access log shows, well, it's supposed to be yours, but it looks different from your usual signature. She pulled out a signature card and showed me the entry. The handwriting was clearly not mine. Too confident, too flowing, with flourishes I'd never made in my 73 years of writing. Eleanor, someone forged my signature to access my safety deposit box. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Oh my goodness, Margaret. This is a serious matter. We need to change the locks immediately and file a police report. Do you have any idea who might have done this? I thought about Victoria's casual mention of putting my grandmother's pearls in our safety deposit box. I have a very good idea. But first, I need to see what's missing. 20 minutes later, standing in the bank's vault with Eleanor beside me, I confirmed my worst fears. My grandmother's pearl necklace was gone, along with Charles's gold watch, my mother's wedding ring, and several savings bonds I'd purchased over the years. In their place was a typed note on Victoria's personal stationery. Items relocated for proper insurance and security purposes. VH, Victoria Hamilton. She hadn't even bothered to use her married name. Margaret, this is theft, Eleanor said quietly. Regardless of family relationships, no one has the right to take items from your safety deposit box without proper authorization. I felt a strange calm settle over me as the full magnitude of Victoria's plan became clear. This wasn't just about moving me to the garage or taking over my house. She was systematically stealing my most valuable possessions while building a case for my incompetence. Eleanor, I need to make some changes to my accounts. Effective immediately, I want all access removed for anyone other than myself. No joint account holders, no authorized signers, nothing. Of course, dear. We'll take care of that right now. My next stop was Pemberton, Hayes & Associates, the law firm that had handled Charles's estate and our wills. James Pemberton Jr. had taken over the practice from his father, who had originally drawn up our documents in the 1960s. Mrs. Thornfield, James greeted me warmly as his secretary showed me into his office. I was sorry to hear about the troubles you've been having. Victoria Hamilton contacted our office last week about scheduling a consultation regarding your estate planning needs. My blood pressure spiked. Victoria contacted you about my estate? James looked confused. Yes, she said she was calling on your behalf because you'd been having some memory issues and wanted family assistance with updating your legal documents. She mentioned something about power of attorney arrangements and ensuring your assets were properly protected. I sat down heavily in the leather chair across from his desk. James, I never asked Victoria to contact you about anything. I don't have memory issues, and I certainly didn't authorize her to discuss my legal affairs with anyone. James's expression grew grave. Margaret, this is very concerning. If someone is impersonating you or making unauthorized inquiries about your legal matters, we need to address this immediately. I pulled out the notebook I'd found in Victoria's room and handed it to him. I found this in my guest room. I think you should see what she's been planning. James read through Victoria's notes, his expression growing darker with each page. When he reached the section about competency assessments and power of attorney discussions, he set the notebook down and looked at me directly. Margaret, what I'm seeing here appears to be a systematic plan to gain control of your assets by questioning your mental capacity. This is not just unethical, it's potentially criminal. What can I do to protect myself? James leaned forward. Several things, and we should do them immediately. First, we need to document your complete mental competency with an independent medical evaluation. Second, we should update your will and all legal documents to reflect your current wishes explicitly. Third, we need to consider filing restraining orders if necessary to protect your property and person. He pulled out a legal pad and began taking notes. Tell me everything that's happened since Victoria moved into your house. For the next hour, I recounted every detail I could remember. Victoria's immediate assumption of authority over house decisions, the furniture rearrangements, the missing jewelry, the garage ultimatum, the forged bank signatures. James took meticulous notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions. Margaret, you're describing what appears to be elder abuse, financial, emotional, and potentially physical, given the threat to remove you from your own bedroom. Connecticut has strong laws protecting elderly residents from this type of exploitation. I don't want to hurt Daniel, I said quietly. He's still my son, even if he's making terrible choices right now. I understand your concerns about family, relationships, James replied gently. But Daniel is an adult who has allowed his wife to victimize his mother. At some point, protecting yourself has to take priority over protecting people who refuse to protect you. James walked me through several legal options. I could revoke any existing powers of attorney, update my will to reflect current circumstances, and establish a trust that would protect my assets from future manipulation. Most importantly, I could file for an immediate restraining order that would require Victoria to maintain distance from my financial accounts and personal property. There's one more thing we should discuss, James said as our meeting neared its end. Your house. If Victoria is making claims about future inheritance rights, you might want to consider your long-term plans for the property. I thought about Victoria's casual certainty that the house would eventually be theirs, her renovation plans, her assumption that she could redistribute my belongings at will. What are my options? Well, it's your property to do with as you choose. You could sell it and move somewhere smaller. You could establish a trust that specifies exactly how and when it might be inherited. Or, he paused, studying my expression. Carefully, you could remove it from inheritance consideration entirely. The idea hung in the air between us like a revelation. I had always assumed the house would go to Daniel after my death, but that assumption was based on a relationship that no longer existed. Daniel had stood by while his wife systematically abused and robbed his mother. He had allowed Victoria to plan my exile to the garage without intervention. If I sold the house, I asked slowly, and moved somewhere else, what would happen to Daniel's expectations? Expectations aren't legal entitlements, James replied firmly. You owe no one an inheritance, Margaret, not even your son, especially not when that son is complicit in your mistreatment. As I drove home that afternoon, my mind was spinning with possibilities I'd never considered. For 73 years, I had lived my life according to other people's expectations. I had been the dutiful daughter, the supportive wife, the self-sacrificing mother. I had assumed that putting family first would result in family loyalty. But Victoria had shown me the truth. To her, I wasn't family. I was an obstacle to be removed, an inconvenience to be managed, a resource to be exploited until I was no longer useful. The house that Charles and I had built with our own hands, the home where we had raised our son and created decades of memories, had become a prison where I was no longer welcome in my own bedroom. As I pulled into my driveway and saw Victoria's car parked where Charles used to park his truck, I realized that sentiment was a luxury I could no longer afford. This house represented 45 years of my life, but it also represented several $100,000 of my assets that Victoria was already planning to claim. That evening, as I ate dinner alone while Victoria and Daniel laughed, together upstairs in what used to be my private sanctuary, I made a decision that would change everything. If Victoria wanted to treat me like a stranger in my own home, then perhaps it was time she learned what happened when you bite the hand that holds the deed. The sweet, accommodating Margaret was officially retired. The woman who emerged from that lawyer's office was someone Victoria had never met before, someone who understood exactly how much power she actually held and wasn't afraid to use it. The escalation began the very next morning when I returned from my errands to find Victoria directing two men in coveralls as they measured my garage. She stood there with a clipboard, pointing and gesturing as if she were overseeing her own property renovation. "Margaret!" she called out cheerfully when she spotted me. "Perfect timing. I've hired contractors to start the garage conversion immediately. We should have your new space ready by the weekend." I watched in stunned silence as one of the men discussed electrical outlet placement, while the other examined the walls for insulation possibilities. Victoria had moved beyond planning and threats. She was actively converting my garage without my permission. "Victoria, I never agreed to this." She barely glanced at me, too busy showing the contractors where she wanted the Murphy bed installed. "Oh, Margaret, we talked about this yesterday. You seem to understand that this was the best solution for everyone." "I understood that you made a demand. I never agreed to anything." The contractors looked uncomfortable, clearly sensing the tension but unsure whether to continue their work. Victoria solved their dilemma by handing them a check. "Gentlemen, please continue with your assessments. Mrs. Thornfield is just having some adjustment anxiety. Perfectly normal at her age." At her age, in front of strangers, Victoria was now openly treating me like a confused elderly person who couldn't make her own decisions. That afternoon, while Victoria was out running what she called household errands, I discovered the next phase of her takeover. She had systematically gone through my closets and packed away most of my clothes. Boxes labeled Margaret's winter items and Margaret's formal wear sat stacked in the hallway, ready for storage. When I opened my bedroom dresser, I found that my drawers had been cleared of everything except a few basic outfits. Victoria had apparently decided what clothing allowance was appropriate for my new garage lifestyle, but it was what I discovered in Daniel's old room that truly shocked me. Victoria had converted it into a temporary office space, complete with filing cabinets and a computer setup. Spread across the desk were real estate listings, renovation estimates, and what appeared to be a comprehensive market analysis of homes in Millbrook Falls. In the center of it all sat a folder labeled Thornfield, Property Development Plan. I opened it with trembling hands and found a complete business proposal for renovating and flipping my house. Victoria had researched comparable sales, calculated renovation costs, and projected profits. According to her analysis, the house could be updated and sold for nearly double its current market value. The timeline showed my relocation to assisted living, scheduled for February, major renovations beginning in March, and a target sale date of late summer. She had planned my entire displacement around maximizing the property's resale value. At the bottom of the proposal, in Victoria's precise handwriting, was a note that made my blood run cold. "Daniel agrees that his mother would be much happier in a structured environment where her daily needs are managed by professionals. Inheritance timeline accelerated for tax purposes. Daniel agrees. My son had actively participated in planning my exile." That evening, when Daniel came home from work, I was waiting for him in the living room with Victoria's folder open on the coffee table. "Daniel, we need to talk." He looked tired and distracted, loosening his tie as he glanced at the documents. "Mom, whatever Victoria's been planning, I'm sure she has your best interests at heart. She's just trying to help organize things." "Help organize my removal from my own house?" Daniel sat down heavily in Charles's old chair, avoiding my eyes. "Mom, you know this house is too big for you. Victoria's ideas about downsizing make sense from a practical standpoint." "Practical for whom? For me? Or for your wife's real estate? Investment plans?" I pointed to the profit projections in Victoria's folder. "Did you know she's been researching the resale value of this house? Did you know she's planning to renovate and flip it after I'm gone?" Daniel glanced at the documents, then looked away. "Victoria's background is in marketing and business development. She naturally thinks in terms of maximizing value. That doesn't mean anything sinister. She forged my signature to access my safety deposit box, Daniel. She stole my grandmother's pearls and your father's watch. For the first time, Daniel looked genuinely surprised. What? That can't be right. Victoria said you gave her those items for safekeeping because you were worried about security. I gave her nothing. She took them without permission and forged bank documents to do it. I have evidence. Daniel's face went pale. Mom, are you sure? Maybe there was just some miscommunication. There was no miscommunication. Your wife is systematically stealing from me while planning to have me declared incompetent so she can take control of my assets. Victoria chose that moment to arrive home, her arms full of shopping bags from expensive stores. She breezed into the living room with her usual confident smile, which faltered only slightly when she saw the open folder on the coffee table. "Oh, you found my research project," she said lightly. "I was going to surprise you with some options for maximizing the value of your estate, Margaret. By stealing my jewelry and forging my signature at the bank." Victoria's expression shifted to one of wounded innocence. "Stealing? Margaret, you're confused again. You asked me to help safeguard your valuables. I have your written permission." "Show me this written permission." Victoria set down her shopping bags and walked to the temporary office space. She returned with a piece of paper that made my stomach drop. It was a handwritten note, apparently in my own handwriting, authorizing Victoria to assist with financial and property management due to increasing memory concerns. Except I had never written those words. The handwriting was eerily similar to mine, but with subtle differences that suggested careful practice and forgery. "Victoria," Daniel said slowly, "when did my mother write this?" "Last week, after that incident where she couldn't remember where she put her car keys," Victoria replied smoothly. "She was very upset about her memory lapses and asked me to help ensure her affairs were properly managed." I stared at the forged document, amazed by the audacity of it. Victoria had not only stolen from me, she had created false documentation to justify the theft. "I never wrote this," I said firmly, "and I never asked for your help with anything." Victoria's expression grew concerned, the same look she might give a confused child. "Margaret, you're having another memory episode. This is exactly why we need to make arrangements for professional care." She turned to Daniel with practiced worry. "Honey, your mother's confusion is getting worse. Yesterday she accused me of moving her jewelry, and now she's forgotten about this agreement we made together." I watched my son's face as he looked between the forged document and his mother's accusations. I could see him weighing his wife's word against mine, his concern for my mental state against his loyalty to his marriage. "Daniel," I said quietly, "you've known me for 37 years. You've known Victoria for 3. Who do you believe?" The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. "Mom, I think the stress of aging and living alone has been harder on you than you want to admit. Victoria's just trying to help, even if her methods seem overwhelming." Victoria moved closer to Daniel, placing a supportive hand on his arm. "I've been researching memory care facilities that specialize in helping seniors maintain their independence while ensuring their safety. There are some lovely places less than an hour from here." Memory care facilities. Victoria was now openly discussing institutionalizing me while sitting in my own living room. "I'm not going to a memory care facility," I said, my voice stronger than I felt. "And I'm not moving to the garage. This is my house, and I'm staying in it." Victoria's mask of concern slipped slightly, revealing a flash of irritation. "Margaret, you're being unreasonable. We're trying to help you transition to a safer living situation before something terrible happens. The only terrible thing happening is you stealing my belongings and plotting to steal my house." "Steal your house?" Victoria laughed, a sound devoid of warmth. "Margaret, this house is going to be Daniel's inheritance anyway. We're just trying to make sure it's properly maintained and that you're properly cared for until that time comes. The casual assumption that my death was a scheduling matter to be planned around was breathtaking in its callousness. I'm 73. Not 93, I said. I could live another 20 years. Are you planning to keep me in the garage that entire time? Victoria's smile grew sharp. Well, that depends on how cooperative you're willing to be, doesn't it? The threat hung in the air like smoke. Cooperate with her theft and manipulation, or face increasingly harsh consequences. That night, as I lay in my own bed for what I suspected might be the last time, I realized that Victoria's escalating demands had revealed something crucial about her strategy. She wasn't content to wait for my natural death to claim her inheritance. She was actively working to accelerate the timeline through whatever means necessary. The garage had never been the endgame. It was just the first step in a systematic plan to break my will, isolate me from support systems, and ultimately force me into a situation where I had no choice but to surrender control of my assets. But Victoria had made one critical error in her calculations. She had assumed that because I was elderly and had been generous in the past, I was weak and defenseless. She was about to learn exactly how wrong that assumption was. The breaking point came on a frigid Thursday evening in mid-December when I returned from my weekly grocery shopping to find my belongings scattered across the front lawn like debris from a tornado. My clothes, books, photo albums, and personal items had been unceremoniously dumped in cardboard boxes and plastic bags, some already soaked through from the light snow that had begun falling. Victoria stood in the doorway supervising two different men, not the contractors from earlier in the week, but what appeared to be professional movers. She held a clipboard and checked off items as they carried my possessions outside. "Victoria!" I called out, rushing from my car. "What are you doing with my things?" She looked up with that same bright, false smile she'd perfected. "Oh, good. You're back. I wanted to surprise you. We've accelerated the timeline for your move to the garage. I thought it would be easier for you if we handled the heavy lifting ourselves." I stared in horror as one of the movers carried out my cedar hope chest, the one my mother had given me when I married Charles. Inside were my wedding dress, baby clothes from Daniel's infancy, and decades of letters Charles had written me during his brief military service. "Put that down," I demanded, rushing toward the mover. "Those are my personal belongings." The mover looked confused, glancing between Victoria and me. Victoria stepped smoothly between us. "I'm sorry, Margaret, but you're having another confusion episode. We discussed this yesterday, remember? The garage conversion is complete, and we need to move your things so you can get settled before the weather gets worse." I looked around, wildly. My neighbors were watching from their windows, seeing an elderly woman apparently arguing with her family about moving boxes. To them, it must have looked like a sad but necessary family intervention. "I never agreed to move anywhere," I said, my voice rising. "And I certainly didn't agree to have my belongings thrown on the lawn like garbage." One of the movers approached Victoria. "Ma'am, maybe we should wait until this gets sorted out. The lady seems pretty upset." Victoria's expression hardened. "The lady has dementia and doesn't remember our arrangements. If we wait for her to have a clear moment, we'll be here all winter." Dementia. She had just publicly declared me mentally incompetent, in front of strangers and neighbors. "I do not have dementia," I said firmly, addressing the movers directly. "I am Margaret Thornfield, and this is my house. This woman has no authority to move my belongings anywhere." The two movers exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Victoria pulled out her phone and showed them something on the screen. "This is the power of attorney document that gives me legal authority to make decisions about Mrs. Thornfield's living arrangements and property," she said smoothly. Power of attorney. She was now claiming legal guardianship over me. "That document is forged," I said desperately. "I never signed any power of attorney." Victoria's voice took on the patient tone one might use with a difficult child. "Margaret, your memory problems are getting worse. We went to the lawyer's office together last month, remember? You signed the papers yourself. I felt the world tilting beneath my feet. She wasn't just stealing my property. She was stealing my identity, my autonomy, my very right to exist as an independent person. Where's Daniel? I demanded. I want to talk to my son. Daniel's at work, Victoria replied. He knows about the move. In fact, it was his idea to handle it while you were out so you wouldn't get distressed watching your things being packed. Another lie, delivered so smoothly that I could see the movers accepting it as truth. In their minds, they were helping a concerned daughter-in-law manage a difficult elderly relative. I watched helplessly as they carried out more boxes. My mother's china, Charles's books, the quilts my grandmother had made by hand. Each item represented decades of my life, memories, that Victoria was discarding like trash. At least let me go through the boxes, I pleaded. There are things in there that have sentimental value. Victoria consulted her clipboard. I've already sorted everything, Margaret. I kept the items that will fit in your new space and donated the rest. You don't need so many possessions at your age anyway. She had decided what portions of my own life I was allowed to keep. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Among the boxes on the lawn was a large manila envelope labeled Estate Documents. Inside, I could see the edges of legal papers, including what looked like my original will. Victoria, those are my private legal documents. You have no right to those. Actually, I do, Victoria replied, pulling out a different folder. As your legally appointed guardian, I'm responsible for safeguarding all your important papers. Guardian. The word hit me like a physical blow. Somehow, without my knowledge or consent, Victoria had managed to gain legal guardianship over me. When was I declared incompetent? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Victoria's smile was triumphant. Last Friday, Dr. Morrison signed the medical assessment, and Judge Bradley approved the emergency guardianship petition. Daniel was very concerned about your declining mental state. Dr. Morrison, my family physician for 20 years. Judge Bradley, a man who played golf with Victoria's father. The realization that they had orchestrated this legal theft with the cooperation of people I trusted was staggering. I was never evaluated by Dr. Morrison, I said. Yes, you were, Victoria replied patiently. Last Tuesday, when I took you for your regular checkup. You don't remember because you were having a particularly bad day. Another lie, but one that would be impossible to disprove since she could claim my memory problems prevented me from recalling. The appointment. I stood there on my own front lawn, watching strangers pack up my life while my daughter-in-law calmly explained that I was no longer legally competent to make my own decisions. The systematic nature of her plan was breathtaking. She had manipulated doctors, lawyers, and judges to strip away my rights while making it appear that she was the concerned family member trying to help a confused elderly woman. Where are my car keys? I asked suddenly, realizing I hadn't seen them since returning from the grocery store. Oh, I took those, Victoria said matter-of-factly. As your guardian, I can't allow you to drive anymore. It's not safe. My car, my independence, my ability to leave this situation, had been taken away with the same casual authority she'd used to steal my jewelry. I was trapped. The movers finished loading my belongings and handed Victoria a receipt. She tipped them generously and watched them drive away, then turned to me with that practiced look of concern. Now, Margaret, let's get you settled in your new space. I've made it very cozy. She led me to the garage, which had indeed been converted into a basic living area. A Murphy bed was mounted against one wall, next to a small dresser and a card table that served as both desk and dining area. A space heater hummed in the corner, barely taking the edge off the December cold. A curtain hung from the ceiling, presumably for privacy, though from what I wasn't sure. There's a mini fridge for snacks, Victoria pointed out cheerfully, and the powder room is just through that door. You have your own entrance, so you won't need to bother us in the main house. Won't need to bother them. In the home I had built, with my own husband's hands. "Victoria," I said quietly, "why are you doing this to me?" For just a moment, her mask slipped completely, revealing something cold and calculating beneath the surface. "Because I can," she said simply. "Because you were naive enough to welcome me into your home and trust me with your family. Because you never imagined that someone would be smart enough to use your own kindness against you." She moved closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that wouldn't carry to any neighbors who might still be watching. "You think being old and sweet and helpless will protect you, but it won't. Daniel chooses me over you. The law recognizes me as your guardian. Your doctor believes you're incompetent. No one is coming to save you, Margaret." With that, she turned and walked back to the main house, my house, leaving me standing alone in the converted garage with a space heater and a Murphy bed and the devastating realization that I had lost everything. But as I sat on that narrow bed, surrounded by the concrete walls that Victoria thought would contain me, I felt something unexpected: clarity. For months, I had been confused by Victoria's behavior, making excuses for her cruelty, trying to understand her motivations. Now, with all pretenses stripped away, I finally saw the situation for what it really was. This wasn't about family dynamics or generation gaps or different approaches to household management. This was about a predator who had identified a vulnerable target and systematically destroyed her life for financial gain. Victoria had made one crucial mistake, though. She had assumed that because she had successfully manipulated doctors, lawyers, and even my own son, she had won completely. What she didn't know was that Margaret Thornfield, the woman who had survived the Great Depression, built a home from nothing and raised a family through decades of challenges, was far from finished fighting. The garage was meant to be my prison. Instead, it would become my headquarters for the most important battle of my life. The first night in the garage, I barely slept. The space heater cycled on and off with mechanical regularity, never quite managing to chase away the December cold that seeped through the concrete walls. But it wasn't the cold that kept me awake. It was the burning clarity of what I needed to do. By dawn, I had formulated a plan. Victoria had made several critical errors in her rush to claim victory. First, she had assumed that having me declared incompetent would prevent me from taking any legal action. Second, she believed that isolating me in the garage would cut me off from all support systems. And third, she had underestimated exactly how much fight remained in a 73-year-old woman who had finally stopped playing by rules that were designed to destroy her. My first challenge was communication. Victoria had taken my car keys and my regular phone, but she had overlooked the old rotary phone that Charles had installed in the garage decades ago for his workshop. It was connected to a separate line that appeared on our phone bill as garage extension, a detail that Victoria, in all her research, had apparently missed. At 7 a.m., while Victoria and Daniel were still asleep in my former bedroom, I called, "James Pemberton." "Margaret?" His voice was filled with concern. "I've been trying to reach you since yesterday. Someone called our office claiming you'd been hospitalized and asking for copies of your legal documents. James, I need help. Victoria has had me declared legally incompetent and appointed herself as my guardian. She's moved me into my own garage and taken control of everything. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the connection had failed. When James spoke again, his voice was tight with controlled anger. "Margaret, this is impossible. Guardianship proceedings require extensive documentation, medical evaluations, and court hearings. You can't be declared incompetent without your knowledge or representation." She says Dr. Morrison signed a medical assessment and Judge Bradley approved an emergency petition. Dr. Morrison hasn't conducted any competency evaluations that I'm aware of, and Judge Bradley is currently on vacation in Florida. Margaret, someone has either forged these documents or filed fraudulent paperwork. Relief flooded through me. I wasn't losing my mind, and I wasn't legally powerless. Victoria had overplayed her hand. What can I do? First, we need to document everything. Do you have access to any of the papers Victoria claims give her authority over you? I thought about the manila envelope I'd seen among my belongings on the lawn. She took all my legal documents, but I saw them yesterday when she was moving my things. We need to get those documents examined immediately. If they're fraudulent, Victoria could be facing serious criminal charges. But Margaret, we need to be careful. If she's willing to forge legal documents and file false guardianship papers, there's no telling what else she might do when she realizes her scheme is unraveling. James arranged to meet me at 2 p.m. at a small cafe 3 blocks from my house, walking. Distance, even for a woman whose car keys had been confiscated. He also gave me the number for Adult Protective Services and insisted I file a report immediately. My next call was to my neighbor, Ellen Morrison, who lived 2 houses down and had been my friend since the Carter administration. I explained the situation as succinctly as possible. "Margaret, that's horrible!" Ellen's voice was filled with indignation. "Harold and I wondered what was happening when we saw all those boxes on your lawn yesterday. Victoria told Mrs. Peterson that you were having memory problems and needed to move to a smaller space. So Victoria was already controlling the neighborhood narrative, painting me as a confused elderly woman whose family was managing her decline. Ellen, I need a favor. Could you pick me up this afternoon and drive me to town?" Victoria took my car keys. "Of course, dear. What time?" 1:30. "And Ellen, if anyone asks, I'm going to the library for my regular volunteer shift. Consider it done." By 10 a.m., I had also called Adult Protective Services and filed a formal complaint alleging financial exploitation and false imprisonment by my daughter-in-law. The caseworker, a competent-sounding woman named Sarah Chen, promised to begin an investigation within 24 hours. "Mrs. Thornfield, based on what you're describing, this appears to be a serious case of elder abuse. We'll need to examine the guardianship, documents Victoria claims to have, and we'll want to conduct our own assessment of your mental capacity. How long will that take?" Emergency situations can be expedited. If the documents are fraudulent, we can have the supposed guardianship reversed within days. The key is proving that the paperwork was filed without your knowledge or consent. My final morning call was to the Millbrook Falls Police Department. I spoke with Officer Kevin Walsh, a man I'd taught in kindergarten 30 years earlier. "Mrs. Thornfield, is everything okay? I heard from my mom that you were having some health issues." The speed with which Victoria's lies had spread through our small community was both impressive and frightening. "Kevin, I need to file a report for theft and forgery. My daughter-in-law has been stealing my jewelry, forging documents, and has now fraudulently claimed legal guardianship over me." That's a pretty serious accusation, Mrs. Thornfield. Are you sure there isn't just some family miscommunication going on? I had expected this response. Victoria's strategy of questioning my mental competence was designed to make authorities doubt any complaints I might file. "Kevin, I taught you to read when you were 5 years old. Do I sound confused or incompetent to you?" There was a pause. "No, ma'am, you sound exactly like you always have." "Okay, let's set up a time for you to come in and file a formal report." At 1:30 p.m., Ellen arrived as promised, her expression a mixture of concern and barely contained fury. "Margaret, this is outrageous. Victoria has no right to treat you this way, legal documents or no legal documents." As we drove toward town, Ellen updated me on the neighborhood gossip that Victoria had been spreading. "She's been telling everyone that you've been having memory problems and wandering around confused. She says Daniel was worried about you living alone and that the family decided to arrange for closer supervision." Closer supervision in my own garage. Well, she's not telling people about the garage part. She's making it sound like a loving family taking care of an aging relative. At the police station, Officer Walsh took my statement with professional seriousness, though I could see him, struggling to reconcile the composed, articulate woman sitting across from him with the confused elderly person Victoria had described to the community. "Mrs. Thornfield, I have to ask, Have you been experiencing any memory problems or confusion lately? Kevin, yesterday I balanced my checkbook, completed a crossword puzzle in under 30 minutes, and had a coherent legal consultation with James Pemberton. Does that sound like someone with dementia? He smiled. No, ma'am, it doesn't. At 2 p.m. sharp, I met James at the cafe. He had brought a colleague, a woman named Patricia Reynolds who specialized in elder law and fraud cases. Margaret, Patricia, has reviewed the information you gave me yesterday, and she agrees that what you're describing appears to be systematic elder abuse with potential criminal elements. Patricia leaned forward. Mrs. Thornfield, forgery of legal documents and fraudulent guardianship filings are felonies in Connecticut. If we can prove Victoria filed false paperwork to gain control of your assets, she could face years in prison. What do I need to do? First, we need to get copies of the documents she claims give her authority over you. Second, we need to prove that you never consented to any guardianship arrangement. Third, we need to demonstrate that you are fully, mentally competent and capable of managing your own affairs. James pulled out a thick folder. I've already scheduled you for a comprehensive mental competency evaluation with Dr. Rebecca Martinez. She's an independent physician who specializes in geriatric psychology. The evaluation is tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. What about my house? Victoria is living there as if she owns it. Patricia's expression grew grim. That's more complicated. Even if the guardianship is fraudulent, she and Daniel are still legal residents of the property. We can't force them to leave immediately, but we can establish your right to live in your own home without harassment. And my belongings? She threw everything I own into boxes and put them in storage. That's theft, regardless of any supposed guardianship authority, James said firmly. We'll get a court order requiring her to return your possessions immediately. That evening, I returned to the garage feeling something I hadn't experienced in months: hope. Victoria's carefully constructed scheme was beginning to crumble under scrutiny from professionals who understood the law and weren't impressed by her manipulative tactics. Around 8 p.m., Victoria appeared at the garage door with a plate of food and that same false smile. I brought you some dinner, Margaret. Daniel made your favorite pot roast. I looked at the plate, a small portion of overcooked meat and vegetables, the kind of meal one might serve to an elderly relative who couldn't be trusted with proper portions. Thank you, I said calmly, accepting the plate. Victoria lingered in the doorway, studying my face. You seem different tonight, more alert. I had a good day, I replied truthfully. Well, don't get too excited about temporary improvements. Dr. Morrison explained that dementia symptoms can fluctuate. You might have good days and bad days. I met her gaze directly. Victoria, I saw Dr. Martinez today for a competency evaluation. She's an independent physician who specializes in geriatric psychology. Victoria's smile faltered slightly. Why would you need an independent evaluation? Dr. Morrison has been your physician for years. Because Dr. Morrison apparently signed a competency assessment without ever examining me. Funny how that works. For the first time since I'd known her, Victoria looked genuinely uncertain. Margaret, I think you're confused about the timeline. You've seen Dr. Morrison several times recently. Have I? Then you won't mind if we call his office right now and review my appointment history. Victoria's composure cracked just enough to reveal the calculation beneath. There's no need to bother Dr. Morrison's office. Besides, it's after hours. I smiled at her, the same pleasant, grandmotherly smile I'd been giving her for months. But this time, it carried a very different message. You're right, Victoria. It is after hours. You should probably get some rest. Tomorrow is going to be a very long day. The next morning brought the first real test of my newfound resolve. At 6 a.m., I was awakened by the sound of multiple car doors slamming in my driveway. Through the small garage window, I could see 2 police cruisers and what appeared to be an official county vehicle. My heart raced as I quickly dressed and smoothed my hair. Had Victoria somehow anticipated my moves and called in authorities? To have me removed? But as I peered more carefully through the window, I recognized Officer Walsh getting out of one of the patrol cars, along with a woman in a business suit who must be Sarah Chen from Adult Protective Services. I opened the garage side door just as Officer Walsh approached. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornfield. This is Sarah Chen from APS and Detective Maria Santos from the County Sheriff's Office. We're here to investigate your complaint and examine the documents Ms. Hamilton claims give her guardianship authority." Relief washed over me. They were here to help, not to cart me away. "Thank you for coming so quickly," I said, stepping outside, into the crisp morning air. Sarah Chen was a petite woman with kind eyes and the bearing of someone accustomed to dealing with difficult family situations. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need to ask you some questions to assess your mental state and living conditions. Are you comfortable speaking with us here, or would you prefer to go somewhere more private?" "Here is fine," I replied, glancing toward the main house where I could see Victoria peering through the kitchen window. "I want her to see that I'm not as helpless as she assumed." Detective Santos consulted her notes. "Mrs. Thornfield, we've attempted to contact Dr. Morrison about the competency evaluation that supposedly led to your guardianship. His office has no record of examining you for any mental health assessment in the past 6 months. Furthermore," Sarah Chen added, "we checked with the probate court about the emergency guardianship filing. No such petition was ever submitted by Victoria Hamilton or anyone else on your behalf." I felt a surge of vindication mixed with anger. Victoria had fabricated the entire legal framework for her takeover, counting on my isolation and confusion to prevent me from checking her claims. So the guardianship documents she showed the movers were completely false? "We'll need to examine them to be certain," Detective Santos said. "But it appears that way. Forging legal documents is a serious felony, Mrs. Thornfield." At that moment, Victoria emerged from the house, dressed immaculately despite the early hour, and wearing an expression of concerned surprise. "Officers, is everything all right? I wasn't expecting anyone this morning." Officer Walsh stepped forward. "Ms. Hamilton, we're here to investigate allegations of elder abuse and document forgery. We need to see the guardianship papers you claim give you authority over Mrs. Thornfield's affairs." Victoria's smile never wavered, but I caught a flash of something dangerous in her eyes. "Of course, officers. I keep all of Margaret's important documents secure in my office. Let me get them for you." She disappeared into the house, taking longer than necessary to return. When she came back, she carried a folder that she handed to Detective Santos with apparent confidence. "Everything should be in order. As you can. See, the emergency guardianship was approved last Friday due to Margaret's declining mental state." Detective Santos opened the folder and examined the documents with the careful attention of someone trained to spot inconsistencies. After several minutes, she looked up with a grave expression. "Ms. Hamilton, these documents appear to be fraudulent. The court seal is incorrect. The judge's signature doesn't match official records, and Dr. Morrison has confirmed he never signed any competency evaluation." Victoria's composure finally cracked. "That's impossible. I received these documents directly from the court clerk." "Which court clerk?" Sarah Chen asked pointedly. "Because the probate court has no record of any guardianship proceedings involving Mrs. Thornfield." I watched Victoria's mind working rapidly, trying to find an explanation that wouldn't implicate her in criminal activity. "There must be some administrative error," she said finally. "Perhaps the paperwork got delayed in the system. You know how bureaucracy can be." Detective Santos was not impressed. "Ms. Hamilton, I need you to accompany me to the station for questioning. You have the right to remain silent." "Wait!" Victoria interrupted, panic finally breaking through her careful control. "You don't understand the situation. Margaret has been having serious memory problems. Ask Daniel. He'll tell you. We're just trying to protect her from herself." As if summoned by his name, Daniel appeared in the doorway, still in his pajamas and looking confused by the presence of law enforcement in his driveway. "What's going on?" he asked, his gaze moving between the officers and his wife. Mr. Thornfield, Officer Walsh said, "We're investigating allegations that your wife forged legal documents to fraudulently claim guardianship over your mother." Daniel's face went pale. "Forged documents? Victoria, what are they talking about?" Victoria moved quickly to his side, her voice taking on the pleading tone she'd perfected for manipulating him. "Daniel, you know your mother has been confused. You agreed that we needed to take steps to protect her. The lawyers must have made some kind of mistake with the paperwork." "What lawyers?" Detective Santos asked. "Because the attorney Victoria claimed filed these documents says he's never met either of you." Daniel looked genuinely shocked. "Victoria, you said you'd handled everything through proper legal channels." "I did. There must be some misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Sarah Chen interrupted firmly. "These documents are forgeries, and your wife has been using them to steal your mother's possessions and imprison her in her own garage." The word imprison seemed to hit Daniel like a physical blow. For the first time since Victoria had moved into my house, I saw him truly look at me, not as an aging mother to be managed, but as a person whose rights had been violated. "Mom," he said quietly, "is this true? Have you been sleeping in the garage?" I gestured toward the converted space behind me. "Since Thursday night. Victoria decided I wasn't fit to sleep in my own bedroom anymore." Daniel's expression moved through several emotions: shock, disbelief, and finally, a growing anger that seemed directed at himself as much as his wife. "Victoria, you told me Mom agreed to the garage arrangement. You said she preferred having her own space." "She did agree," Victoria insisted, but her voice now carried a desperate edge. "She's just confused now, having one of her episodes." "I don't have episodes," I said calmly. "I have never been confused about anything Victoria has done to me. I've been very clear about not wanting to move to the garage, not wanting my belongings redistributed, and not wanting to give up control of my own life." Sarah Chen pulled out a tablet and began taking notes. "Mrs. Thornfield, I need to document your living conditions. Can you show me the garage space where you've been staying?" I led the group into the converted garage, watching their expressions. As they took in the narrow Murphy bed, the space heater, the card table that served as my only furniture. The contrast between this sparse, cold space and the comfortable home just 50 feet away was stark and damning. "This is where you've been sleeping?" Daniel asked, his voice filled with horror. "Since Thursday. Victoria had movers pack up all my belongings and dump them on the front lawn. She told the neighbors it was because I was having memory problems and needed a smaller space." Detective Santos photographed everything while Sarah Chen continued her assessment. "Mrs. Thornfield, how would you describe your mental state and cognitive abilities?" "Sharp enough to recognize theft and abuse when I see it," I replied. "Sharp? Enough to contact a lawyer, file police reports, and arrange for independent medical evaluations. Sharp enough to know the difference between helping someone and exploiting them." Victoria made one last attempt to control the narrative. "Officers, you have to understand, Margaret's been increasingly paranoid and hostile. Yesterday, she accused me of stealing jewelry that she actually gave me for safekeeping. She's been making wild accusations about perfectly normal family arrangements." "Speaking of jewelry," Detective Santos said, consulting her notes, "we'll need to examine Mrs. Thornfield's safety deposit box. The bank reported a forgery complaint related to unauthorized access." Victoria's remaining color drained from her face. I had written permission to access that box." "Forged permission," I corrected. "Just like the guardianship documents." The weight of evidence was becoming overwhelming, and I could see Victoria finally realizing that her carefully constructed scheme was collapsing around her. "Daniel," she said desperately, "you have to tell them about your mother's condition. You've seen the memory problems, the confusion." But Daniel was staring at the garage space where his mother had been sleeping, and something fundamental had shifted in his expression. "Victoria," he said slowly, "I think we need to talk, privately." As the officers continued their documentation and Sarah Chen completed her assessment, I stood in my own driveway watching the systematic dismantling of Victoria's elaborate fraud. The sweet elderly woman who had been too polite to fight back was gone, replaced by someone who understood exactly how to protect herself and wasn't afraid to use every legal resource available. Victoria had spent months underestimating me, assuming that age and kindness meant weakness. She was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is someone who has finally stopped playing by rules designed to exploit them. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in months, I was fighting back with the full weight of the law behind me. By noon that same day, Victoria had been arrested and taken to the county jail on charges of elder abuse, document forgery, and theft. But it was what happened after the police cars pulled away that revealed the truth I had been dreading to face. Daniel stood in our driveway, watching his wife being driven away in handcuffs, and I expected to see shock, betrayal, or at least confusion on his face. Instead, what I saw was resignation. "You knew," I said quietly. It wasn't a question. Daniel couldn't meet my eyes. He stared at the garage where I'd been sleeping, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a guilty child. "Not everything," he said finally. "Not about the forged documents or the safety deposit box, but," he trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "But you knew she was lying about my mental state. You knew I never agreed to move to the garage. You knew she was stealing my belongings." Daniel's shoulders sagged. "Mom, it's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple, Daniel. Your wife has been systematically abusing your mother, and you stood by and let it happen. The question is why." We stood there in the December cold, and I watched my son struggle with a truth he'd been avoiding for months. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "Because I'm broke, Mom." The admission hung between us like a confession, in a courtroom. Sarah Chen, who had been organizing her files in her car, looked up with professional interest. Financial elder abuse often involved family members who benefited from the victim's exploitation. "What do you mean, broke?" I asked, though a terrible understanding was already forming. Daniel ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he'd done something wrong and was trying to find the courage to confess. "The tech company I worked for went under 6 months ago. I've been unemployed since July. Victoria's been supporting us with her marketing consulting, but it's not enough to cover our expenses in Portland." The timeline clicked into place with horrible clarity. Victoria had proposed moving to Connecticut, right around the time Daniel lost his job. So coming here wasn't about wanting to be closer to family. It was about finding free housing while you figured out your finances. "It started that way," Daniel admitted. But then Victoria started talking about opportunities, about how much this house was worth, how inefficient it was for one person to live here alone. "And you agreed with her?" Daniel finally looked at me directly, and I saw something in his expression that broke my heart. Not the shame I expected, but a cold calculation that reminded me eerily of his wife. "Mom, you're 73 years old. Even if you live another 20 years, you don't need a 4-bedroom house. The property taxes alone are eating up your income. It made sense to explore options. Options like moving me to the garage so you could take over my bedroom?" "Victoria said you agreed to that. She said you understood it was temporary until we could find a better solution. And when I told you directly that I hadn't agreed to anything, you chose to believe your wife over your mother." Daniel shifted uncomfortably. "Victoria had documentation. She showed me the papers, the medical evaluations. She said Dr. Morrison was concerned about your cognitive decline. Did you ever call Dr. Morrison to verify that?" The pause before his answer told me everything I needed to know. "I trusted Victoria's research," he said finally. "You trusted her research because it told you what you wanted to hear." Sarah Chen approached us, her expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Thornfield, I need to ask you some questions about your knowledge of your wife's activities and your role in your mother's living situation." Daniel's face went pale. My role? I didn't forge any documents. I didn't steal anything. But you were aware that your mother was being moved to the garage against her will? Victoria said Mom had agreed to it. Even after your mother told you directly that she hadn't agreed to anything? Daniel looked trapped. Mom's been confused lately. Victoria said that elderly people sometimes forget agreements they've made, especially when they're under stress. I stared at my son, the child I had raised, sacrificed for, and loved unconditionally, and realized that Victoria hadn't corrupted him. She had simply revealed what had always been there, a willingness to rationalize his mother's mistreatment if it benefited him financially. Daniel, I said quietly, look at me. He met my eyes reluctantly. Do I seem confused to you right now? Do I seem like someone who can't make her own decisions or remember her own agreements? No, he admitted. You seem like yourself. I have seemed like myself every single day since Victoria moved into this house. Every time I told you I didn't want to move to the garage, every time I questioned her decisions about my belongings, every time I asked you to support me instead of her, was exactly as competent and rational as I am right now. The truth of that statement settled between us like a weight. Daniel had chosen to believe Victoria's lies not because they were convincing, but because they were convenient. Sarah Chen continued her questioning. Mr. Thornfield, were you aware that your wife had accessed your mother's safety deposit box without authorization? She said Mom asked her to help manage her valuables because of security concerns. Did you see any evidence of these security concerns? Daniel hesitated. Victoria mentioned that Mom had been misplacing things. What things specifically? Another pause. Her car keys, some jewelry. Did you witness your mother misplacing these items, or did your wife simply tell you about it? The question hung in the air as Daniel struggled to remember any first-hand evidence of my supposed incompetence. I could see the realization dawning on his face that he had accepted Victoria's version of events without any independent verification. She told me about it, he said finally. Mr. Thornfield, your wife has been arrested for elder abuse and fraud. Your mother has been sleeping in a garage for 5 days. At what point did you plan to verify whether the story you were being told was actually true? Daniel's face crumpled. I didn't want to believe Mom was getting worse. Victoria said she was handling everything, that she had medical and legal advice. It was easier to trust her than to face the possibility that Mom was declining. Easier for whom? I asked. For me, he whispered. It was easier for me. The honesty of that admission was both heartbreaking and illuminating. Daniel hadn't been deceived by Victoria's elaborate scheme. He had been complicit in it because it offered him a solution to his financial problems and relieved him of the responsibility of actually caring for his aging mother. Sarah Chen made notes on her tablet. Mr. Thornfield, I need to inform you that Adult Protective Services will be conducting a full investigation of this situation. We'll need to examine your finances, your housing arrangements, and your knowledge of your wife's activities. I in trouble? Daniel asked, like a child worried about punishment. That depends on what our investigation reveals about your level of involvement and whether you were a victim of your wife's deception or a willing participant in elder abuse. I watched my son's face as he processed the implications of what Sarah was telling him. For the first time, he seemed to understand that there might be real consequences for his choices. Mom, he said, turning to me with an expression I hadn't seen since he was small. I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to go this far. How far did you mean for them to go, Daniel? He looked confused by the question. I don't know. I thought Victoria had a plan that would work out for everyone. A plan that involved your mother sleeping in a garage while you lived in her bedroom? She said it was temporary. Everything Victoria told you was temporary, Daniel. The housing arrangement, the financial management, the medical decisions. But temporary has a way of becoming permanent when the person making the decisions benefits from maintaining the status quo. Daniel stood there in the driveway of the house where he'd grown up, finally confronting the reality of what he had allowed to happen to the woman who had raised him. The weight of his choices was written across his face in lines of shame and regret. But for me, the revelation of Daniel's complicity was oddly liberating. I had spent months making excuses for my son, believing that Victoria had somehow manipulated or deceived him. Now I understood that he had made deliberate choices based on his own self-interest. That knowledge, painful as it was, freed me to make my own choices based on what was best for Margaret Thornfield, not what was best for a son who had proven himself willing to sacrifice his mother's dignity for his own convenience. The sweet, accommodating woman who had always put family first was officially retired. The woman who emerged from this revelation understood that real family loyalty had to be mutual, and that blood relationships didn't excuse abuse or betrayal. What happened next would shock Daniel even more than Victoria's arrest had. 3 days later, I stood in the law offices of Pemberton, Hayes & Associates, with a clarity of purpose I hadn't felt in decades. James Pemberton sat across from me with a stack of legal documents that would fundamentally alter the trajectory of my family's future. "Margaret, I want to make sure you understand the implications of what you're about to do," James said gently. "These decisions will be difficult to reverse." "I understand completely," I replied. "I've had 73 years to learn the difference between generosity and self-destruction. It's time to choose self-preservation." The first document was a restraining order that would legally prohibit Victoria from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my property. Even though she was currently in jail awaiting trial, James wanted to ensure she couldn't continue her harassment once she made bail. The second document was far more significant, an updated will that removed Daniel as my primary beneficiary. "Are you certain about this?" James asked. "Daniel is still your son, regardless of his poor judgment." I thought about my son's admission that he had chosen to believe Victoria's lies because it was easier for him. I thought about the 5 nights I had spent sleeping in my own garage while he occupied my bedroom. I thought about his resignation rather than shock when his wife was arrested for abusing his mother. "James, Daniel had multiple opportunities to verify Victoria's claims about my mental state. He could have called Dr. Morrison. He could have asked to see the legal documents. He could have insisted on independent evaluations. Instead, he chose to accept a version of events that conveniently justified his financial benefit." I paused, organizing my thoughts. More importantly, when I told him directly that I hadn't agreed to move to the garage, he chose to believe his wife over his mother. That wasn't naivety or deception. That was a deliberate choice. The new will designated several beneficiaries. The Millbrook Falls Library would receive a substantial endowment for literacy programs. The local senior center would get funding for legal advocacy services, and my remaining assets would be split between charities that supported elder abuse victims. But the most significant change involved the house itself. "I want to establish a trust that will convert the property into a safe house for elderly abuse victims," I told James. "A place where people like me can rebuild their lives after being exploited by their own families." James nodded approvingly. "That's a wonderful legacy, Margaret. The Thornfield house could help dozens of people over the years." The third document was perhaps the most immediately impactful, a formal eviction notice for Daniel and Victoria. "Even though Victoria is in jail, she's still legally a tenant in your home," James explained. "And Daniel has established residency. We need to go through proper legal channels to remove them." "How long will that take?" "Given the circumstances, the abuse, the fraud, the criminal charges, I expect we can expedite the process. They'll have 30 days to vacate the premises." That afternoon, I returned home to find Daniel sitting at my kitchen table, staring at a cup of cold coffee. He looked up when I entered, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow. Mom, I've been thinking about what you said yesterday about my choices. I sat down across from him at the table where I'd helped him with homework, where we'd planned his future, where I'd shared countless meals with the child I'd raised to be better than this. And what conclusions have you reached? Daniel struggled to find words. I think I convinced myself that Victoria's plan made sense because it solved my problems. The financial stress, the job situation, the pressure of supporting both of us on her income alone. Go on? When she started talking about your house as an asset that was being wasted, it felt like a reasonable business decision rather than— He stopped, unable to finish the sentence. Rather than abuse. He nodded miserably. I told myself that we were helping you manage a property that was too big for you, that we were providing security and companionship. But the truth is, I was scared about my own future, and Victoria offered a solution that required treating your mother like an inconvenience to be managed. Yes, the admission came out as barely a whisper. I studied my son's face, looking for genuine remorse versus self-pity. What I saw was a man finally confronting the reality of his choices, but I wasn't sure if he understood the full extent of the damage he had caused. Daniel, do you remember what you said when I told you Victoria wanted me to sleep in the garage? He winced. I said that Victoria probably had good reasons and that you should try to be more flexible. You told your mother to be more flexible about sleeping in her own garage. The weight of that statement settled over him like a shroud. Mom, I was wrong. I was so wrong about everything. Yes, you were. But the question now is what happens next. Daniel looked up hopefully. I was thinking we could start over. I could get Victoria the help she needs, maybe find a counselor who specializes in family dynamics. We could work out a living arrangement that respects your space while still— Daniel. I interrupted him gently but firmly. I'm selling the house. The words hit him like a physical blow. Selling it? But this is our family home. This is where I grew up. This is where you grew up, yes. But it's also where you stood by while your wife abused your mother. Those memories exist in the same space now. Mom, you don't have to sell the house because of what Victoria did. We can make this right. I pulled out the legal documents James had prepared and set them on the table between us. I've already made arrangements. The house will be converted into a residential facility for elderly abuse victims. It will be called the Thornfield House, and it will help people who have been exploited by their own families. Daniel stared at the papers as if they might disappear if he looked hard enough. What about my inheritance? What about the life you and Dad built here? Your father and I built this house as a home for our family. When that family decided I wasn't worthy of basic respect and dignity, it stopped being the home we intended it to be. I softened my voice slightly. Daniel, your inheritance was supposed to be the love and values we taught you. The house was just supposed to be a symbol of the family bond we thought would last forever. It can still last forever, he said desperately. I can fix this. How? The question hung in the air as Daniel struggled to find an answer that would undo months of betrayal and abuse. Finally, he looked up with tears in his eyes. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know how to fix what I've done. Neither do I said sadly. But I do know how to protect myself from further harm. I handed him the eviction notice. You and Victoria have 30 days to find alternative housing. After that, this property will begin its conversion into the Thornfield house. Daniel read the notice with growing desperation. Mom, where am I supposed to go? I don't have a job. Victoria's in jail. I don't have any savings. Those are the same problems you had when you moved in here 6 months ago. The difference is that now you'll have to solve them without exploiting your mother. The harshness of my words was intentional. For too long, I had cushioned Daniel from the consequences of his choices. That maternal protection had enabled him to participate in my abuse without confronting the reality of what he was doing. "I know I don't deserve your help," Daniel said quietly. "But I'm still your son." "Yes, you are. You're the son who chose his wife's lies over his mother's truth. You're the son who benefited from my exile to the garage. You're the son who admitted that ignoring my abuse was easier than facing difficult truths." I paused, letting those facts settle between us. "But you're also the son I raised to be better than this. Maybe losing everything you thought you were entitled to will help you remember who you're supposed to be." Daniel sat in stunned silence as the full magnitude of his new reality became clear. No house, no inheritance, no mother willing to subsidize his poor choices. For the first time in his adult life, he would have to take full responsibility for his own survival. As I watched him process this information, I felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction or revenge, but a profound sadness for the family we could have been if love and respect had been mutual instead of one-sided. The transformation was complete. Margaret Thornfield was no longer the self-sacrificing mother who put everyone else's needs before her own. She was a woman who understood her own worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. What happened next would be the most surprising development of all. 1 year later, I stood in the sunlit kitchen of what was now officially the Thornfield house, watching Sarah Martinez prepare breakfast for our current residents. Sarah was a 68-year-old former teacher whose own daughter had systematically drained her bank accounts before abandoning her in a rundown apartment with no heat. She had been our first resident, arriving just 3 weeks after the house conversion was completed. "Mrs. Thornfield," Sarah called out, "Robert wants to know if you'll be joining us for the legal clinic this afternoon." Robert Chen was our second resident, a 75-year-old retired engineer, whose son had used power of attorney to sell Robert's house and keep the proceeds while moving his father into a neglected nursing facility. Robert had been rescued by Adult Protective Services and referred to us by the same social worker who had helped me expose Victoria's fraud. "Tell Robert I'll be there," I replied, pouring myself a cup of coffee from the large commercial machine we'd installed to serve our expanded household. "Attorney Martinez is bringing some law students who are interested in elder abuse cases." The irony wasn't lost on me that Dr. Rebecca Martinez, the geriatric psychologist who had evaluated my mental competency, had a daughter who specialized in elder law. When I had mentioned my plans for the house, Dr. Martinez had immediately connected me with her daughter's legal clinic at the state university. At 74, I had discovered a purpose I never could have imagined: helping other elderly people reclaim their lives after being victimized by the very families who were supposed to protect them. The Thornfield house served as both temporary housing and comprehensive support center. We provided safe accommodation for up to 6 residents while they rebuilt their financial security, pursued legal remedies against their abusers, and healed from the emotional trauma of family betrayal. Ellen Morrison, my former neighbor, had become our volunteer coordinator after her husband Harold passed away last spring. She managed our network of community supporters who provided everything from transportation to emotional counseling. "Margaret," Ellen said as she arrived for the morning staff meeting, "we got another referral from Adult Protective Services in Hartford, an 80-year-old woman whose grandson has been forging her Social Security checks. Do we have space?" "Sarah's moving to her new apartment next week, so we'll have room in the blue bedroom." These transitions, residents graduating from our program into independent housing, were always bittersweet. We celebrated their recovery while missing their daily presence in our unconventional family. At 10 a.m., I walked to the mailbox, a routine that still brought me simple pleasure after months of having my mail monitored and intercepted by Victoria. Today's delivery included the usual mix of bills and correspondence, but one envelope caught my attention immediately. The return address showed it was from Daniel. I hadn't heard from my son since the day I'd given him the eviction notice. He and Victoria had moved out exactly 30 days later, loading their possessions into a rental truck while I watched from the kitchen window. Victoria had been released on bail pending her trial, and the two of them had left Connecticut without telling me where they were going. I carried the letter to my private office, formerly my sewing room, and opened it with trembling hands. Dear Mom, I know I have no right to contact you after everything that happened. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, and I would understand if you threw this letter away without reading it. But I needed to try one more time to tell you how sorry I am. Victoria was sentenced to 3 years in prison last month. The fraud charges, the elder abuse conviction, and the theft of your jewelry added up to serious felony time. She's serving her sentence in Oregon, where we moved after leaving Connecticut. I've been going to counseling since we left your house. Not couples counseling. Victoria refused to participate in any kind of therapy. Individual counseling to try to understand how I could have treated my own mother the way I did. Dr. Patterson, my therapist, helped me see that what happened wasn't just about Victoria's manipulation. It was about choices I made, decisions I supported, and a willingness to prioritize my own comfort over your safety and dignity. I was unemployed and scared about money, yes. But that doesn't excuse participating in your abuse. It doesn't excuse choosing to believe convenient lies over obvious truths. It doesn't excuse standing by while the woman who raised me was exiled to her own garage. I got a job 6 months ago working tech support for a small company in Portland. It doesn't pay much, but it's honest work, and I'm supporting myself without exploiting anyone. I've been living in a studio apartment and taking night classes in computer programming. I've also been volunteering at a senior center, helping elderly people with basic computer tasks and protecting them from online scams. Dr. Patterson suggested it as a way to make amends for the harm I caused. It won't undo what I did to you, but maybe I can prevent other families from going through what ours did. I heard about the Thornfield house from a news article that ran in the Portland paper. The reporter interviewed you about innovative approaches to elder abuse recovery. I was so proud reading about what you've built, and so ashamed that my actions contributed to your understanding of the problem. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to want a relationship with me. I just wanted you to know that I think about you every day, that I understand what I lost when I chose Victoria over you, and that I'm trying to become the person you raised me to be. If you're willing, I would like to make a monthly donation to the Thornfield house. Not as an attempt to buy forgiveness, but as a small way to support the important work you're doing. My counselor helped me understand that making amends sometimes means supporting your victim's healing even when you can't be part of it. I love you, Mom. I always have, even when my actions suggested otherwise. You deserved so much better from the son you raised with such love and sacrifice. Daniel, I read the letter 3 times, my emotions cycling through anger, sadness, and something that might have been the beginning of forgiveness. Daniel's words demonstrated a level of self-awareness and accountability I hadn't seen from him during the months of crisis. But words were easy. Victoria had been skilled with words too. That afternoon, during our legal clinic, I found myself thinking about second chances and the difference between genuine remorse and manipulation. Attorney Martinez's law students were passionate and idealistic, working with our residents to pursue justice against family members who had exploited them. Mrs. Thornfield, said one young woman named Jessica, your case has become a textbook example in our elder law class. The systematic nature of Victoria's fraud, combined with your son's complicity, demonstrates how financial elder abuse often involves multiple family members. What interests me most, I replied, is how victims rebuild trust after being betrayed by the people closest to them. Have you been able to rebuild that trust with your son? Jessica asked. The question hung in the air as I considered my answer. Trust has to be earned through consistent actions over time, not just through apologies. My son's letter suggests he understands what he did wrong, but understanding and change are different things. That evening, I sat in the living room with our current residents, sharing stories and watching the evening news. These people had become my chosen family, individuals bound together not by blood, but by shared experience and mutual support. Sarah was teaching Robert to knit, something she'd learned from her grandmother decades ago. They laughed together. As Robert struggled with the basic stitches, their friendship a testament to the healing power of genuine care and respect. This was what family was supposed to look like. People who chose to support each other, who valued each other's well-being, who created safety rather than demanded sacrifice. 2 weeks later, I received a check from Daniel along with a brief note saying he intended to send the same amount every month for as long as the Thornfield house operated. The donation was modest, but consistent with someone living on an entry-level salary. I deposited the check and filed the note, but I didn't respond to his letter. Forgiveness, if it came, would happen on my timeline and my terms. Daniel had spent months prioritizing his own needs over mine. Now he could experience what it felt like to have someone else control the pace of a relationship. As I prepared for bed in my comfortable bedroom, the same room Victoria had tried to claim, I reflected on the unexpected gifts that had emerged from the worst period of my life. I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, built relationships based on mutual respect rather than obligation, and created something meaningful from my own painful experience. The house that was supposed to be Daniel's inheritance had become something far more valuable. A sanctuary where broken families could heal and isolated elderly people could find community again. Margaret Thornfield had learned to put herself first, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. And in choosing to value her own worth, she had created space for others to discover theirs as well. The greatest revenge against those who had tried to diminish me wasn't anger or bitterness. It was building a life so full of purpose and joy that their absence became irrelevant. Had stopped waiting for my family to love me properly and started creating the family I deserved. And that, I realized as I turned off the lights in my reclaimed home, was the most powerful transformation of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.